Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I apologize for the slow Wi-Fi connection, but you can hear me, and if you can't, let me know. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville and North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the United States. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, a turbulent economy and world order, a post-COVID economy and world, and of course, the disruptive politics of the United States, which you often follow on the show. But today, once again in America, we are dealing with gun violence. In Louisville, 8 were injured yesterday and a few killed when a 25-year-old gunman in a bank shot and killed by police. The 15th mass killing of 2023. And so the debate continues of what is causing this gun violence to continue to occur. Meanwhile, the Texas courts have been appealing the abortion pill ruling. A judge on Friday suspended the FDA approval of milvestrone, one of the 2 pills used in the most common abortion method in the U.S. This has actually hit news in North Carolina as well, and we're going to be talking about that, of what this implication is. Meanwhile, I've been gone for a few days this week, but a Black Tennessee lawmaker got his job back yesterday. Remember, 2 Black Democratic lawmakers were voted out because of their participation in the protests. And a vote is expected tomorrow in Memphis for the reappointment of the other lawmaker, Justin Peterson. President Biden formally has ended the COVID national emergency. It was first declared in March 2020. And the U.S. has doubts about Ukraine's next move against Russia. There's been leaked intelligence that Ukraine could struggle to retake much territory in a counteroffensive. So we're going to have Sasha Starr talk about that. At the end of the day, I'll open up with the fact that Donald Trump's things have quietened down a little bit, although he's facing a number of charges. But the question is whether these charges have been a little bit too desperate by the Democrats in order to charge the president for these crimes, and whether this will backfire and really does position Donald Trump to clearly be the front runner in the presidential race. So it'll be a Biden-Trump rematch. Maybe not Biden if he doesn't run again, but we'll see. He says that he will run again as long as Donald Trump is running for the presidency. So, Mark, let's go ahead and get started, and then we're going to talk about stuff.
Definitely get ready to get started. I did have a special guest that is actually in the investment space and everything along those lines. So I did want to bring Lewis on just so he can share a little bit about one of the investments that he is very much bullish on. And I'll be interested to see what Shaquille has to say and some of the other folks, since I know they are involved in investments as well. So if it's all right with you, I want to bring Lewis on, and Lewis can share a little bit about why he thinks strategic metal is the way to go and all in that space. So Lewis, glad to have you here, and I know that I reached out to you after hearing about you and all in that way. So definitely tell our world listeners a little bit about yourself and why you think that this is the way to go in the investment space, as we are a new show and we love hearing about different ways of doing investment.
Great stuff. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here. I suppose I wouldn't necessarily say this is the way to go, but it's one of the ways one can go. My company's called Strategic Metals Invest. Strategic metals are an umbrella term for mostly rare earth metals, but to be more precise, you know, the rare earth metals are in the devices we're using right now. There's about 12 in a smartphone, including gold and silver. And they're in, you know, electric cars, solar power, wind power, aviation. It's probably easier to say there's not an industry that doesn't use rare earths. They're the backbone of manufacturing in the 21st century. And China has a monopoly on the market, and they refine over 90% of them. The US and Europe, I'm coming to you from Europe. We're situated right in the middle of Europe. We have a storage vault and a business in Frankfurt in Germany. I'm in Ireland at the moment, but our business is European based. And we're the first industry supplier of rare earths to offer rare earths to private investors. We've been doing it in Europe since 1999, but it's only recently we're doing a bit more, so it's marketing and stuff to other parts of the world. That's a quick introduction. If that brings up any questions, go ahead and ask, or I can continue on.
No, I'm definitely going to bring in some of my better experts in that space and everything. But I guess one of the questions I have to ask is, we oftentimes hear about lithium and some of the other elements that I assume are in the rare earth space being so dominated by China and all in that way. So I was just wondering, are you going to, with your company, try to shift that narrative? Because we do know that there are some rare earth elements in the various parts of the world, whether that's Africa, Asia, or a number of others. But so far, the kind of the stronghold person in that conversation does seem to be China. So what are y'all doing to disrupt that, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
Well, it's a very good point, actually, Mark. You're getting into the heart of it there. Purely from an investment point of view, though, I suppose I would be apolitical about that. I suppose let me clarify a bit further, right? Like lithium and copper and stuff there's plenty of them. And also rare earths. They're called rare because when they were first discovered, they were considered rare, but the truth is they're not all that rare. China has about 50% of the world's reserves. There's plenty in North America, Africa, Australia. Japan is about to start mining the seabed for rare earths. But that's all going to take about 10 or 15 years to come to production. And what's key about rare earths is it's not necessarily that they can be found in abundance. It's that they don't occur naturally. They're always a byproduct of another raw material. For example, hafnium, which is needed in jet engines and rods for nuclear reactors, aerospace industry. Hafnium is always found as a byproduct of zirconium mining at a ratio of 50-1. So in order to get 1 ton of hafnium, you need to mine 50 tons of zirconium. So the zirconium industry will not ramp up just to satisfy a surge in demand for hafnium. So there's some tricky, interesting dynamics involved. The probably most important one, and it's starting to move up on the political agenda in the US in the last 6 months with the Inflation Reduction Act, is Europe and the US have realized we need to wean our dependence off China. And how can we do that? By creating our own independent supply chain. But it just doesn't happen overnight. It took China a generation to get where they are. I'll give you some context there. There's 39 universities in China graduating metallurgists and geologists and critical minerals degrees. So the Chinese are graduating about 200 people a week, every week for the last 30 years. That human capital, that engineering expertise existed in the US in the 1980s, but hasn't since. It's been completely depleted. US has a handful of universities graduating degrees in metallurgy, maybe 200 a year. So if the political will is there all of a sudden to wean this dependence off China, it's not an overnight matter. It's still going to take time. So what our strategy is as investors, though, is to hack, if you will, China's geopolitical strategy. This is not even an economic strategy for China. It's just geopolitical. They have big plans themselves for electric cars, for solar, for wind power. Only about half of China is on the grid, and they're bringing hundreds of million people out of poverty, every 4 or 5 years. They want to continue to do that, and they need the raw materials to do it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm going to bring in some of our investment experts because this is actually something that I am not the greatest expert in, but I'm going to see if Shaquille and Sasha, who are definitely in that space, have some questions for you, and Steve may have some questions as well. But Shaquille, I know, has done work in the investment field, and I know that definitely Sasha has done some work in the investment field as well. Sasha is over there in Canada, and Shaquille usually would be coming to us from Australia, but today he's coming to us from New Zealand, and all in that way. But definitely,
well, let's just clarify for the Australian Tax Office. I don't normally come in from Australia. It's just that COVID kept me in Australia. So just make sure we clarify that. I actually want to say a couple of things. Firstly, to the audience and to other panelists, I'm sorry I've been away for a while. I had a death in the family, so I rushed back to New Zealand after I was in the Maldives. So that's why I've been away for a little while. Since you guys saw me in the United States and in Canada, obviously when I met with Sasha. So something that a lot of people don't know about me is I actually started technically in insurance, and then I was a futures and commodities dealer. And I enjoyed doing it. I never really specialized in a particular commodity because I was just a madman that liked the risk and liked the volatility of the futures contracts. And someone like Lewis, and I hope Lewis and I can probably catch up with you off the show and pick your brains a little bit. But it's been very interesting to me to watch what's happening in the commodities markets. Very interesting for me to watch what's happening in the metals markets. I probably join a lot of people in not having as much faith in the US dollar and not really having as much faith in the euro or the British pound at the moment, and many other Western currencies. And so the question is, well, what do you do with your money? And the obvious answer, and this is actually going to be a question to you, Lewis, the obvious answer is, well, go to metals, go to the main ones. Gold and to a lesser degree silver, because silver has some industrial uses, but gold and silver is often the place where you look. What concerns me and what really makes me go, gee, I don't know, I really don't know what I'm going to do here, is what we just saw happen in 2020. Normally we see that gold and silver to a lesser degree, but gold especially, is negatively correlated to the markets. But what we saw during and also bonds are negatively correlated. What we saw in 2020 was we had this calamitous event occur with COVID, and we actually saw the markets, bond prices, and gold move in unison. We also saw the currencies move in unison. And that's the first time that I can think of. I can't remember another time in recent history, since probably the Dodd-Frank rules or the Bretton Woods rules. I can't remember that ever happening before. So I'm a little bit concerned if people, all rush into gold and silver, just to use those as an example, because they're concerned about the future of the US dollar. Is gold and silver subject to some manipulation? Are the big market makers, the big banks, they're obviously aware that that's where people are going to put their money. Are they going to try and squeeze everybody yet again? Is that a concern? Is that a problem?
Lewis, your thoughts?
Is that for me?
Yeah, that was for you. Sorry, Lewis. I was directing most of it to everybody else, but the last bit was to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Shaquille. Sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
I suppose the honest answer is I don't know. Our specialty is more in rare earths. I think I'd probably agree with you. There's a rush right now into gold and silver. Specifically, why I first came across rare earths as an asset class in 2015, and then I invested in 2017 and became a business partner in 2020. And it's just when I really took a deep dive and looked at the fact that I think China realized long before Europe and the US that rare earths would be the backbone of manufacturing in the 21st century. And my partner in this is the only industry supplier. I probably should have said that at the beginning, is the only safe way to own rare earths is if you're buying them from an authentic industry supplier. Like if I was just a sales and marketing guy here in Tipperary in Ireland, and I thought, I'm going to buy metals from China, and then we're going to sell them to the US Department of Defense for F-35 fighter jets, just red flags and wouldn't work. But our core business, 80% of our business activities is we're buying rare earths from producers, mostly in China, and we've been doing that for 30 years. And then I'm going to use a term here. I'm going to borrow a term from the US, which is our side hustle is, since about 2010, we've been offering private investors, mostly in Europe, the opportunity to also own these rare earths. So, my personal belief is if rare earths had been available as gold and silver as an asset class, as long as precious metals have, that people would very naturally have them as a partner sitting alongside gold or silver in their portfolio. But I'm more interested in rare earths, and I don't actually hold gold and silver at the moment. I did before, but right now my only metals are the more strategic types, the ones that are critical, to technology, to electric.
We've seen an enormous run up in lithium, for example, and many other rare earths. And you're absolutely right. I think from my perspective, as somebody who deals with institutional investors, obviously we can get our hands on it. And I know that when people come to me and say, Shaquille, what should I do? And I kind of sit there. Actually, I had this conversation a couple of days ago with my cousin's friend. And he said, what should I do? And I said, I don't know. And he goes, well, where do you put your money? And I went, I can't really tell you, or even if I do tell you, you can't put your money there. And I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic, because you're making accessible to retail investors something that really isn't. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. I use gold and silver as an example there because I think it's an interesting situation that we're facing right now. And just to sort of expand on gold and silver, Sasha, if you remember, I think it was 2021. It might have been 2020. I think it was 2021 when I was on your show, and I actually said that I thought that silver relative to gold was underpriced because gold had gone up by so much. And normally my predictions are hopeless. That's why I trade very specifically the way I do and hedge all the risk, because normally my predictions are awful. But I actually got that one pretty right. Silver increased quite dramatically against gold for that period of time after I'd said that. So, it's interesting to see those investment ideas. Lewis, I'd like to ask you, and Mark, I think Dan Worthington and a couple of the guests are waiting on stage. But I'd like to ask you very quickly, Lewis. There's a lot of talk in the media at the moment about, the Middle East potentially depegging from the US dollar, something I've been saying that they're going to do for the last 20 years. We see the BRICS countries that are entering into an alliance. We see Saudi saying to China, "Yep, we're going to trade our oil in Chinese currency," which Americans don't like particularly. But it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. Does it make sense? And I think for Saudi Arabia, it absolutely makes sense. For China, it absolutely makes sense. For BRICS countries, what they're doing makes sense. If we were in those countries, we'd be really happy that these are the sorts of developments that are happening. What do you think, if the US dollar experiences significant problems, and most commodities are traded in US dollars, what do you think happens in relation to commodities such as rare earths, like you're talking about, and other commodities in general? What do you do if you own them and they go up, but the US dollar is under extreme pressure? How do you liquidate it? How do you convert it back into fiat? What do you do with your rare earths once that you've made a profit and you're trying to cash out?
Okay, so as I mentioned, our core business, it's a very, very pertinent point, Shaquille. Our core business is as an industry supplier. Just to give you some context, we have, at last count, we've 2,480 industry buyers, not investors. I'm not talking about the investment side at all. We've over 2,000 clients in 70 different countries. So the only end buyer, obviously, for rare earths is an industry buyer. So Tradium, my partner, the German company, they will mediate the sale to an industry buyer for our clients.
Okay.
Now, there are some other options as well. There's some companies in the UK, there's one or two in the US as well that are always interested in buying product, as long as they're in the chain of custody is intact, and there's some key dynamics involved in owning rare earths, like security options that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have with gold. One would be you've got to buy from somebody who's offering you industrial grade gallium or hafnium or indium that they know they can liquidate to the industry. And of course, you've got to be in business with somebody who can liquidate them for you. So that's
so let's come back to the retail investors for a moment there. So are you, just so I understand, are you saying then that your company, if Joe Bloggs off the streets comes up and says, "Hey, I've got $100,000, I'd like to buy some rare earths," you're going to guarantee them that what they're going to buy is going to be of that standard, and that they actually have an exit if they want to? Is that what your business does?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. As I said, I suppose you could say there's three businesses involved. The core business is as an industry supplier, German company, Tradium, Tradium, in business since 1999. And being somewhat entrepreneurial, I'll tell you what happened was about 2010, some of the industry buyers were asking Tradium in Frankfurt, any chance you can store some of these raw materials for us? Let's say a German company making, medical devices, they need a constant sort of supply, but they don't have the capital to go directly to producers, or they're not buying the volume. And secondly, they don't have a storage facility. Some of them are in, oxide form and powdered form. Some are metal, so they need certain storage conditions. So what happened was that industry buyers were saying, any chance you could store them? And Matthias Root, the CEO of Tradium, being sort of an entrepreneur, figured, well, why don't we offer storage as well? So they bought what was a bunker in World War II in downtown Frankfurt, 2 levels below ground, converted it to a bank level secure vault. It's fully insured. It's a Zollager, so it's a duty-free zone. So they began to store the materials there for industry buyers, and then they said, well, why not offer private investors the same option? We can guarantee the authenticity of the metals, the chain of custody, the purity. We can guarantee industrial standard storage. And we can offer to mediate a sale to one of our industry buyers. I mean, there's a spread and they make some money out of it. So that's where the idea came from. And they've been doing it successfully to private investors since about 2010. I came on board as their first, for the first 10 years, they focused mostly Germany, Austria, Switzerland. There's 100 million people there. It was a good market to begin. And they've now bought land to build a second storage facility, and they've invited in a couple other sort of partners. I'm the partner for Ireland, UK, and North America. Actually, I've one client already in Australia. I've been only doing it now since 2020. I've some clients now in Australia, Dubai, Europe, but I tend to focus a bit on North America because I think North American clients like the product,
Hey, Lewis.
I absolutely love what you're doing. And I know that ABX, for example, talking about gold, ABX had a similar model with gold and really made gold accessible to people, had it in their vaults. And I always thought, I wonder why people don't, for me, because I knew a lot of jewelers, I thought, I wonder why people don't do that with gemstones. But with what I never even thought about rare earths, and I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. So I've got to go for about 5 minutes. I'll be right back. But Lewis, after the show, I'd love to grab your details. Switzerland, Germany, and Austria is the areas that I actually work in. I run a fund out of Liechtenstein, or an external advisor to funds out of Liechtenstein. And I have a property in Switzerland that I live in. So, absolutely love to talk to you more about it. I think it's absolutely fantastic what you're doing.
Thank you, Shaquille. Yeah, I definitely will hang on for a chat. Yeah.
Hey, Lewis, really quickly, you had alluded to it earlier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and Steve may have some questions about this as well. But you mentioned at the beginning about how a lot of the education in China is actually training a lot of folks in geology and other things that are very important to the rare earth market. And there was a time that was seen as a popular hobby, if not a popular career, and all in that way. And I don't know that it is seen as much now as it used to be here in the U.S. and in the West. So is that something that we need to think about? Not knocking those folks that want to work in the tech field, and we do know that the tech field needs rare earth as well. But I was just wondering, is that an educational aspect that maybe we should be looking into? Because as you mentioned, I think the amount of graduates in the earth sciences are probably down and all in that way, but I'm not sure of that. But if you got some,
can I make it easy for Lewis because he doesn't want to get political? Yes. Anything that you study with real world applications is going to be good. Let's get rid of gender studies. Let's get rid of non-binary studies. Let's get rid of trans studies and focus on things that's actually going to lead to jobs in a productive part of the economy. What do you reckon, Dan?
I wanted to hear from Lewis, but Lewis.
Well, they got to buy their purses from somewhere.
Well, Mark, I think, and as I mentioned, I'm relatively new to the industry, and full disclosure, I'm a sales and marketing guy, and I was lucky enough to be able to partner with a genuine industry supplier. So the only thing I can say is, what have I learned in the last few years from the experts, right? And the reason I got involved, I had a little bit of an intuitive feeling that now I believe is coming to fruition, which is that rare earths would become more into the mainstream and higher up on the political agenda. Because the fact is, and I know this to be true, speaking with the people in Frankfurt and stuff, is China completely dominates the market. And you can Google this, there's a very shrewd quote from, I think 1987, the premier of China, standing on a rare earth mine, said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." And I think at that moment in time, China understood before, Europe and the US that, this technology that that was coming, and they just understood they would be sort of the backbone of manufacturing. And what happened, my understanding is at that time, the US was producing about, and Dan might know more about this than me, but my understanding is the US was producing about 60% of the world's rare earths at Mountain Pass in California. And the Chinese legitimately sort of moved all the what makes rare earths expensive is not the mining itself. It's that they have to be found, they have to be extracted, they have to be separated, and they have to be refined. They don't occur naturally. And that refining processing is what makes them complicated and expensive. And I think at the time the US thought, well, why don't we let the Chinese go ahead and do that? Because it's complicated, it's messy, they'll do it on the cheap, and then we'll buy these raw materials, inexpensively from them. And I understood they set up the Bureau of Mines in the US to keep an eye on things and make sure the US remained competitive. This bureau was defunded in 1996 and has only existed on paper ever since. And China literally has sort of ran away with it. But now, when you consider rare earths are sort of I suppose you could say they're the downstream raw materials that ultimately become trillions in upstream GDP, because there's nothing that they're not in, smartphones, computers, cars, aviation, aerospace, medical devices. And there's, more and more uses coming in, but I understand as part of the push in the US to wean its dependence from China, that they are encouraging or introducing more degrees in the university for critical minerals. There's only a handful of universities in the US, and I believe this to be true. I don't want to say everything I'm saying is 100% because I'm just gathering information as well. But my understanding is there's only a handful of universities in the US that actually graduate degrees in critical minerals. But I believe there's a push on now to improve that.
It makes a lot of sense. One of the things I didn't know, but I just learned today, is that Dan was the CEO of a publicly traded mining company. So I don't know if Dan's got any thoughts, and definitely I know Sasha may have some thoughts, and I know that Steve is a big person around infrastructure and all of that. That's one of the things that he oftentimes pushes. So anybody have any questions for Lewis? If not, we'll move to some of the other items in the world as well. But definitely any questions or thoughts that folks have. Sasha, you're in the investment space, and Dan, you've definitely done some work as well. And
I think one of the disincentives to mining in the United States and among in North America really is the environmental risks and the technology and the byproducts that creates. my company was sitting on $77 trillion worth of lithium reserves. And, he's right. The problem isn't getting to it because it's plentiful. The problem is the cost of shipping and refining and doing all that. And it has an environmental cost too. Everybody's talking about this move to all electric vehicles and everything else. What they don't realize is that has a tremendous, tremendous environmental cost. And until they're able to develop technologies that are much cleaner, that cost is borne on the world. Just because they ship it to China and let them do the dirty work, so to speak, doesn't mean it's any less clean. That it doesn't do substantial harm to the environment. So it's a real issue. Mining technologies have been improving over time with separation technologies that don't involve caustic chemicals and other byproducts that leave terrible environmental residue. But it's going to take more of a commitment to that kind of mining, that kind of refining, and that kind of thing. And the United States is going to have to decide what it wants to do when it grows up. It can't have its cake and eat it too with respect to China. It can't. It's got to stop doing that. It's got to create its own refinement capacity. It's got to become less dependent on China. China was very forthright in seeing the trend and jumped on it and put the rest of the world at a huge strategic disadvantage when it came to these kind of rare earth mineral.
Yeah. Has there been any pushback environmentally?
Dan, I will just say on that, Dan, that to be fair, that I support centre-right parties as a general rule, but I think that centre-right parties and in your country, the Republicans, have a lot to answer for here. It's great to blame Joe Biden and the Democrats for lots of things, but at the end of the day, Republicans and centre-right parties, the Tories in the UK, and centre-right parties all over the world, have sat back and done nothing when there's been a huge increase in the environment better. Now, I don't believe that the plans that are being put forth by centre-left parties around the world are particularly good ones for the reasons that you've just outlined, that there's still going to be the environmental cost. It's just that the environmental cost is being pushed to another country. But centre-right parties, instead of saying we have a better plan, if we manufacture it here, we can contain emissions, we can contain environmental damage a little bit better through regulation. What they've instead done is said, well, I'm just going to rubbish these renewable energy movements, and what we should do is just continue burning oil and coal and that sort of stuff. And if centre-right parties came up with a better plan than the centre-left parties, well, then there could be a debate about one.
Well, I think that's an oversimplification.
It is, but we're on a quick show. I don't want to. Well, it may be, but we are on a quick show, so I don't want to get into about.
Yeah, I mean, no.
Other than to oversimplify it that way.
I think, as a rule, both the left and the right have been unwise. You have innovators like Elon Musk that has taken the electric car technology forward as the solution, and he's done that because he's had the resources, government backing, and other things to do it. At the expense of other technologies, it may be actually a better solution, like hydrogen and other things that are actually less impactful on the environment, potentially. I've heard there may be some negative effects in the environment too, in terms of methane production and that kind of thing. But I mean, the problem is we're not looking at this with a big picture and really thinking through it. It's sort of knee-jerk reaction. Market takes the risk and bears. In the United States, we all see things in the bottom line that the Chinese have been looking at the top line for a long time, and protecting the long-term bottom line. We haven't been doing that because of our short-term, profit-centered consumer mentality, and it's a real stupid way to go about planning for the future.
Right.
Well, but on that, so you and I slightly disagree on hydrogen.
I think that Shaquille just stepped
I think
into
innovation as well. I'm going to leave for a few minutes, but I want to thank Louis for being with us. And I think innovation is an important concept we often don't talk about. I mean,
Yep.
Bill Gates' book on climate disaster was actually a good book because he made a good point that the governments can't solve all the problems. I think that goes well with Dan Worthington and Shakille's point. I mean, there's a lot of innovation, whether it's sustainability, Internet of Things, technologies that we could be using that would actually encourage investment and job growth and those kinds of things, while at the same time solving environmental problems. And I think this is something important. A lot of the venture funding that we see is going into technology, but I think this whole notion of a clean tech cluster, and hopefully, Mark, we can get some guests to speak about that, is a good way to approach the problem. So we acknowledge what you're doing, because I think, and I know Dan Worthington, as a Republican, center-right Republican, has had some legitimate concerns about.
I'm actually independent, but that's okay.
But significant amounts of money being thrown at the problem doesn't necessarily mean that it's solving the problem. And just increasing regulation doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make the environment any better, right? So I think this is an opportunity for, I think, both parties to come together and come up with common sense, pragmatic solutions to this notion of clean tech sustainability, right? So
yeah, so I don't disagree with Shaquille. I think that both sides are being stupid and myopic. Is my whole point.
Yeah, I agree.
The political
I agree with Dan. I got disconnected there for a while.
Hey, give me 1 second.
A disagreement about what specific technology was the best to move forward. We could have a debate on that. Dan would never call me names. I would never call Dan names. I would say, hey, instead of hydrogen, we should use this, and we could weigh up the pros and cons. And part of the pros and cons is weighing up the environmental cost, not just the monetary cost, but if we care about the environment, we should be weighing up the environmental cost. And I think, to Steve's point, there's a lot of companies that get really significant subsidies from government, but those subsidies are at the behest of lobbyists who are furthering the goals of particular industries. So you end up saying what I consider to be quite bizarre funding. You get funding for solar panels and wind farms in areas where solar panels and wind farms are not the most efficient, where a different technology would work better. And you don't get the funding for solar panels and wind farms in other areas where solar farms and wind farms and solar. I hate to be that libertarian again, but I blame government. I blame government policy, and I blame our political system for creating that. And meanwhile, we are seeing other countries, I won't call them our adversaries or our enemies, because I think they're acting perfectly logical and acting in their best interests. But we are seeing other countries who are rapidly improving their economies. They're rapidly improving their influence in the world, because we're not, because we can't be bothered to do it, because we're not having proper conversations. And I just think that that's a real shame. And I think frankly, I think it's pathetic from our
point of view. Agree.
Shaquille, I've got shocking news for you and everything, but I actually took one of those political quizzes and all in those lines, and actually I came up on the same party line as you are, because it actually came up with my views being very libertarian, which actually kind of somewhat shocked me and everything. But I just thought I'd let you know that we have more in common than we actually share sometimes on this network and everything. I took one of those lovely pocket quizzes and came up as a libertarian or a.
Well, then stop voting for those stupid Democrats.
No, it's a brave moment for you, Mark Lee, to have admitted that on air. So forevermore, we shall know you as being a racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, right winger. Conservative.
One
none
thing,
of those things. I don't think libertarians are those things either,
because that's a label. Because that's the label that I always get given.
But just to say one thing Mark touched on there, it's just funny you're having this conversation right now, because this week in Ireland we're celebrating 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, which is and the IRA put down the guns and the opposing parties. And actually Joe Biden is landing here sometime today, but again, being apolitical. But during my lifetime, we saw apartheid disappear in South Africa. We saw the wall in Berlin come down. We've seen peace in Northern Ireland, and the biggest lesson we learned, George Mitchell, a US senator, came over and was very helpful, getting like men from the IRA and the opposite side, people who said, you'll never get us in a room together. You'll never go to sitting at a table. And Mark reminded me of that when he said we have more in common. And what their goal was to not focus on the differences, but they probably disagreed on most things. But they said, if we can find one thing that we agree on that's important to us, let's go with that. And the most important thing to them was peace. And it was, we don't want another generation to grow up the way we grew up, with nothing but violence, And although they disagreed on just about everything else, they found peace through one thing, that one common goal. So it's a great point, and I think it's it's not really us and them, it's us, isn't it? It's always us. We just have to find something we can agree on and move forward with,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think if I just say a couple of things on that, one, I think Donald Trump and others pushing a populist movement really made it clear that it wasn't about left and right. It was about elites versus everybody else. And you tended to find that everybody else sort of had very similar goals. That people on the centre right politically that maybe wanted lower taxes could certainly understand why people who were working wanted to have higher wages, to oversimplify a very complicated issue. What concerns me, and I think what disappoints me dramatically, I'm British. I was born in Australia. I'm British because of whatever reason. I don't understand the Irish situation. I have a lot of Irish friends. Most of my girlfriends have been Irish, to be honest, and I've had the explanation from people in Northern Ireland and the Republic, and I still don't really fully grasp it, and I certainly don't grasp it well enough to take a side and say who was right or who was wrong, because I don't know, and I wasn't there, and I'm not Irish. Yeah. During the Brexit negotiations, the best level of diplomacy that the European Union could come up with was to threaten the UK and Ireland over the border, and whether the border would be slammed shut. I think that to threaten to inflame tensions that have been extinguished for the entirety or focal point for the European Union is disgraceful. And I personally think that everybody in Ireland should have been absolutely disgusted at the EU about that. And I think that to usurp the will of the people who voted for Brexit in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England, you don't do that. You don't threaten to inflame those relations. I don't get it. I don't understand why.
Shaquille, I know you're trying to stay, but I know Lewis is trying to stay apolitical, not necessarily Shaquille, because Shaquille doesn't always stay apolitical. Neither do I stay apolitical all the time. But there was
I'm very apolitical. I'm an independent. It's not my country.
But there was a person that was trying to do some political negotiations, political conversations. I'd love to hear what Sasha has to think about this. But, there is a French president that is over there in the whole Asian European theater and all in that space, and he was actually saying that maybe that the European countries should become a third pole, independent of both Washington and Beijing. So he was actually, I guess, pushing for.
Oh, you mean macaroni? Macaroni.
Yes, and I was just wondering what Sasha's take on this was, because he was basically saying that they should. The worst thing would be to think that we as Europeans must become followers on this topic and adapt to the American rhythm or the Chinese overreaction. And he was actually talking about Taiwan in that particular case. I'd be interested in what he has to say about Ukraine, because actually one of our political leaders actually snapped back at him and used Ukraine as part of his examples and all of that, because in a video posted on Twitter, Senator Mark Rubio drew parallels with the war in Ukraine, on which Macron hopes to enlist the help of China in terms of trying to put an end to this war and all along those lines. But what are y'all's thoughts about this effort and Macron saying that the Europeans need to be independent and a third pole is, I believe, the quote that he used, and all in those lines?
I didn't know that Macron is Polish.
I think the European Union.
No, that's okay.
Sorry. I think that European Union is ill-equipped to solve political problems, period.
Amen.
They are doing very well economically, and obviously the wars in at least Western Europe were prevented now for a long time. But, for example, I believe one of the reasons Great Britain left the European Union is because it's not always would agreeable to the policies of European Union. Some of them were immigration policies, but many others as well. So they wanted to have, and as a great nation, I think that they should have their own independent policy. Economically, it wasn't probably a smart move, but anyway, they hang in. Now, I wish that the situation between Ukraine and Russia could be solved as a similar model, what you just mentioned, Luis, between Ireland and England. And unfortunately, that is impossible, regardless of what Macron says or Emperor Xi or any other figures, simply because too much evil was done by Russian forces in Ukraine. If that would be just an occupation or even attempt to take over Kyiv, and if it wouldn't work, okay, so it didn't work, maybe we'll try again, or so on, or maybe we will withdraw. Now it's too little, too late. Now they have to pay. When you do something wrong, you have to pay for your mistake. If I bought a stock and it went down on me, I have to pay for it. I have to sell it, or I have to fight it by selling some covered calls. Sorry.
Up there in Toronto.
Your voice.
What sort of la-la lands are you living in up in Toronto? Since when?
Your voice is coming in and out. It might be where he's at in New Zealand and everything. So hopefully he'll come
for our
back.
mistakes. If we get it wrong, we pay for it. When governments
Impossible, Shaquille. Sorry.
Cutting out, bud.
Yeah.
pay for it.
Shaquille, your voice is breaking. It's impossible to follow anything what you're saying. So I'm sorry I can't answer whatever you were asking.
So okay, I'll try that again.
Yeah. He's gonna try to adjust and everything. Steve, did you have any thoughts about?
Go ahead. No, I just wanted, heard Sasha's insight about Ukraine, and as I leave the show today, I'm really concerned about the violence again in Louisville. I think that we just got to figure out why guns are getting in the hands of the wrong people. And just a lot of mentally ill people out there. People just very, very frustrated, very mentally sick. And someone lost their job in the bank, and they're going to get a gun and gun all these innocent people down. It's just leaves me very concerned about just any one of us out there. Be careful when you're driving. If you are in a fender bender or whatever, just don't roll down your windows. Just be careful because people are really, I think unstable right now out there. And I think it's not so much the gun owners, but it's the people that are getting these guns that are so mentally ill that they would have no value for human life. I don't know what the country is going to do, but, I think something's got to be done. There's a lot of gun homicides in such a short period of time, So, and then obviously COVID is officially over, but it really has been, it has been for a few years.
Yeah.
And I don't know what Lewis and everybody thinks, but I was actually having this conversation with some friends of mine. And while the government may have declared COVID over, there are still folks that are getting COVID on a regular basis. There are still cases of COVID. So I don't know that COVID is over. Maybe the government restrictions on how we handle COVID are over, but I don't know that I would ever declare COVID to be officially over when there are still many cases out there. There are still deaths that are taking place and a number of those lines. So like I said, I know a lot of folks that are still taking precautions, even if they go to work. Matter of fact, we had a jazz event at one of the places I work a couple of days ago, and I can tell you that at least one of the band members had his mask still on, and it might have been because of the the existing conditions that he had and all in that space. I don't know all the narrative as to why he had his mask on and others did not, but definitely I would not say that it is 100% over. That's just my thought on that. And I was also
it's a national emergency that permitted Biden administration to spend billions of dollars on unnecessary stuff. That's the emergency that's over.
Oh, that's the emergency is over. Okay, so the emergency of the funding, it will be interesting to see what happens. I think that there were some initiatives that were actually done under Trump as well, so I can't put them on either one side or the other because they were both the Republicans and Democrats that were involved in the whole COVID conversation. And even with the gun conversation, I had an interesting conversation with that as well, because a friend of mine was having an argument that it is, and it even goes to Ireland, it goes to the PLO, it goes to a number of other places around the world. It is the people behind the guns that actually kill the folks. So the argument that they were making was that, the guns don't necessarily kill the people. It's the people that actually pull the truck that are killing the folks, because there were some people that were trying to make an argument that guns are the ones that kill the people, and I don't know that
Can you guys
the case.
Can you guys hear me now? Sorry, I switched over to my third satellite backup, so I don't know why, because New Zealand I normally have coverage. Can you guys hear me properly?
I hear you a lot better.
All right. So, Sasha, what I said, which you didn't hear, was I don't know what la-la land you're living in up in Toronto in Canada, but since when do governments and politicians ever take responsibility and pay the price for themselves being wrong? If you get a trade wrong or I get a trade wrong, we have to take personal responsibility for that and we wear the cost. Since when do governments do that? When governments get it wrong, their people have to pay the cost. Their citizens have to pay the cost. The taxpayer has to pay the cost. And that's the unfortunate thing.
I would
They wear no responsibility.
I got to run, Mark. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues. See you guys tomorrow, Friday.
Okay, I think they would pay the cost at the polling stations next election. That's normal process. It's not always happened, mind you. I understand.
Well, Sasha,
how it should work at least.
Sasha, Canada is very similar to Australia. Would you like to tell me what most of your politicians, and Lewis, you don't have to answer this, so don't answer this, but what happens in the UK as well? What do most politicians do when they leave government? They, for some reason, seem to be able to get these fantastic high-paying jobs with private enterprise, right, and end up with board positions with companies that they happen to be lobbied by while they were politicians. So they don't pay any cost, and they don't care.
Shakil, come on, you're fighting a natural process that all boards would like to have a prominent members, that people know about them. And of course, they have much better name recognition and weight for the corporate board than some unknowns, maybe dignified people, maybe specialists in their own rights, but their name is not say nothing to most of the people, and the prominent politician, whether it's
that may well be true, Sasha. That may well be true, yeah. But everything you've just said negates your previous point that these people are going to pay a cost. They're not going to pay a cost.
No, no.
Right, nothing happens to them. What cost was paid by the marketing executive from Bud Light? What's their market decrease now? $1 billion they've lost in the last week. $1 billion, and she's out there saying, "Oh, this and that," and she didn't lose her job. She'll probably get a promotion from here. So, what costs do these people actually pay?
You were bringing up Budweiser.
You're asking difficult questions.
What happened with Budweiser? Sorry.
Mulvaney.
Yeah, I was referencing Budweiser, Dan's favorite beer.
The dude that's on the can that people are shooting at.
Oh,
yeah.
Part of what they did is in part of this effort to have representation and all along those lines, they put a representative that was part of the trans community, and it has gotten a lot of pushback from around the country. So that is what they are referring to, and that is who Mulvaney is. Mulvaney is a person that is of the trans background.
I think she kind of looks like a Clydesdale.
So I'm going to probably say something that's going to surprise everybody on here. I actually don't have that much of a problem with what Budweiser did, because to be fair, they didn't offer these cans for sale to the public, right? They send cans with faces and different things to different influencers online. So I actually don't have that much of a problem with it. What I think people are reacting to is not the trans movement. It's to Dylan Mulvaney. Okay, people don't like, and especially women don't like, the way that Dylan Mulvaney is representing women. Okay, people are reacting to Tampax sponsoring him. They're reacting to Nike sports bras or her wearing bras. This is not transphobia. This is simply people that are saying, look, leave us alone, stop this stuff. And now what they've done is they've turned themselves into a meme. We've seen bottle shops and pubs and bars all across the United States that are saying we can no longer sell this beer unless somebody is buying it as a prank on their mate. You're seeing shelves being stocked. And it's not just there, by the way, in the United States. We buy Budweiser in Australia. It's one of my favourite US beers. It's rubbish, but I quite like it compared to some of our rubbish. And we're not seeing Budweiser being sold anymore over here, right? So it's an issue. And what price, to go back to Sasha, what price was being paid by the marketing executives that came up with that idea? Gillette did this really, I think, really offensive ad attacking their client base, attacking people like me, saying that we're all chauvinistic pigs or whatever they wanted to say, to try to stamp out toxic masculinity. Now, not only did Procter & Gamble take a hit because of that ad, and not only did Gillette take a hit, their finances seem to be sort of back to where they are, but they've now got less than a quarter of the shelf space in most major supermarkets than what they used to have. And what price was paid by that marketing team? Nothing.
And there was a counter, and we get ready to wind up because we got about a minute or two to go. But there was another ad that was out there as well. We actually showed it earlier in the network. It was actually one that was called "Turning That Good S into Turn That Bad S into Good S," and it was really about the way that one of the beer companies had used the pinup girls and everything. So they were actually trying to encourage and highlight the women beer makers and all in that space, because they were saying that women had been the earlier founders of beer making and all in that way. So they were actually asking people to turn in those pinups that the boys and even I guess some girls have had as well, and collect those in order to turn it into fertilizer, in order to make it into the hops and everything. So that was an ad that I think it was Miller did, but it was actually definitely one of the other beer companies that was trying to do some of that political advertising that goes on as well.
I've long said, whether you're on the political left or the political right, leave your politics at home. Sell your product, focus on your product, focus on your customer base. Who cares what your politics are? I'm not going to buy or not buy something because of politics. But if you attack me as a person, I'm going to stop buying your product. I don't buy Gillette, for example, because I think what they said it infuriated me to see those ads in Australia. And don't tell me that what's going on in America is exactly the same as what's going on here. You didn't even bother to look at what was happening in Australia. So I think that they should leave politics aside. I think they should focus on the real issues. And the real issues for them is, how do we sell beer, or how do we sell, our product? And this thing with Dylan Mulvaney. Look, I actually don't dislike Dylan Mulvaney. Dan Worthington will probably, sigh and shake his head at this. But if I met Dylan Mulvaney, I'd be like, hey, Dylan, let's have a beer. Let's have a beer. I want to talk to you. I want to see what's going on. I have no problem with it.
This bud's for you, bud.
Live your life. Live your life however you want to live your life, but don't force your values on everybody else. Sasha.
Before we finish the show, let me say one important thing.
Please.
Tomorrow in my financial show, which starts at 1:00, I will release the name of the stock, which pays 10.5% dividends. It's a rare metals producer in Latin America. And actually, as we talk, it moved today up almost 3%. So this is a piece of useful information where you can actually make some money. Tomorrow at 1:00, I will release the name of the stock. Thank you, and we'll start Ukrainian show shortly.
Yeah, very shortly we're going to start that. Louis, just really quickly, if you want to give ways that you can be reached and all in that space, and then we're going to get out of here. But if you can lift.
Thank you for that, Mark. Yeah, and Shaquille and Dan, pleasure meeting you. Look forward. Hopefully, I enjoyed the conversation. So it's amazing to be here in Ireland and New Zealand and America, and we can talk. But yeah, I actually have a call as well right after. So Shaquille, if we want to connect, the website is Strategic Metals Invest. If you just go there and even download the brochure, I'll get your email and I'll connect with you, and we can chat further.
I assume you're personally connected with Mark. So Mark, send him my phone number and my email. We'll communicate that way.
Yeah, great stuff. And if you do visit Europe, if you're in Switzerland, if you ever want to come to Frankfurt, visit the Vault. You're welcome. It's the largest sort of inventory of rare earths anywhere in the world outside of China. We've more than 200 metric tons in the storage.
So my two main entry points into Europe is either Frankfurt or Zurich. So I'm there quite frequently. So as I said, we'll communicate through Mark, exchange phone numbers. I'd love to see you. And also just so you know, my holding company is actually in Cork in Ireland. So one way or another, I'd love to talk to you some more, and I'll meet you in person. I'll be over in Europe next month. So.
Great. Sounds good. So let's get ready to get out of here. And Louis, we'll have to have you come back in the near future and share some more of your insights as well. But I was glad to have you on the show on this particular day and to learn more about rare earth. So definitely was glad to have you and hope to have you back in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Dan and Shaquille, and all the best.
Thank you.
Best to you as well.
Bye-bye.